Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 175 of Circle Up and Get Real. And I am so excited to share my friend Josh with you today. Josh Hoper is my guest, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him as we go. But Josh, you and I have been friends for, oh my goodness, a long time.
20 probably.
Really? We're not that old, Josh.
It's hard to, it's hard to believe that time goes so fast.
It does. I always think of pre-COVID and post-COVID. It seems like, that year just was not even in my awareness. And so it's crazy how time flies. But I'll tell you a little bit about Josh. Josh has a company called Torchlight AE, which I want you to talk a little bit more about. Torchlight AE exists to place business owners in Fargo-Moorhead, and beyond, behind the wheel of the organization they've built. The mission of Torchlight is to provide customers with clarity and sustainable confidence to make better decisions for their businesses. So, Josh, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be on the podcast.
Josh and I, every now and then it's like, okay, time for another beer. Okay, time to get together, because we just have to connect. And so we kind of bump into each other and connect, and then we go do our thing, and then we come back together. We've shared a lot of similar pathways and also interests, I think, Josh.
Yep, for sure.
So we have a couple of things we want to talk about. Josh's business. We want to talk about networking, and I want to learn more about the Enneagram, and Josh is an expert in that. So before we even jump into all of that, Josh, how did Josh Hoper get to be Josh Hoper? I mean, what's your interest in the things you've been doing? And if you could trace it back, what do you know about yourself in the vein of getting real?
Yeah, it's been a really quite an interesting journey. And I mean, I have to go back to some of my experiences when I was young. I took some pretty typical paths in some ways, teaching swimming lessons after high school and doing that kind of a thing. But then I decided to take some a little bit bigger jumps. Spent a couple summers in Alaska in the fishery. And then I spent 5+ years in selling study guides door to door.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding.
So that the fishery experience was great because it taught me about working long hours and what it's like to be tired and and working hard. The book field taught me a lot about some of my limits in terms of dealing with people, getting lots of doors shut in my face. But also I got a chance to help manage some teams and do some recruiting, and taught me a lot about how I want to interact with people and those kinds of things. Things got a little bit more typical in 2000 when I went to work for that tiny company called Great Plains Software back in the day.
Yeah.
And so that was my introduction to both like really, really heavy into technology, and then also into like the guts of how businesses work, starting with accounting, like how the money flows and tracking down that 10 cents that didn't make it from the sub ledger into the general ledger. All those kinds of things. And I was lucky enough to have a lot of experiences on doing a few different things, from just the pure financials part of things, reporting, order processing, field service. And then I moved over to working on a CRM product at Microsoft, of course, which acquired Great Plains in 2001. Sales, service, and marketing automation was the next thing I learned about. And my job was to troubleshoot and fix technical issues, but my interest really was in talking with the people about how the business runs. That was the fascinating part to me. And so after I left Microsoft in 2006, went to work for an implementation company called Summit Group Software, where I continued that kind of work, helped build that company. But that was the kind of the interest I had was talking with people about how their business runs, what's working, what's not working, and how do we fix it. And of course, when you're a software guy, the answer to all those questions involves software in some kind, in some sense, right? And that's an amazing business to be in. I'm so glad for my time in there. But in 2012, I parted ways with Summit and started thinking about what else could I do? Well, I ended up starting a business, Torchlight, and it was actually not called Torchlight at the time. I had to do a rebrand a couple years in, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
But the original business was mostly about analyzing financial statements for companies and finding out what the story that the financials were trying to tell them. And so I built sort of the priorities of my business were helping people create peaceful, sustainable, and valuable businesses. And it was what I thought at the time was a very fundamental piece of business, running businesses. If you know the story the financials are telling you, then that in my mind, that was like a third of the way there. You had to have a good handle on the story, that your internal story, and then you had to have a good handle on your external story. But the one that I was really helping people with was the financials part. And kind of along the way, go ahead if you have.
I was just going to say, before we get too far into the details of this, I want to know, because this is fascinating to me. I know this about you. I know your story a little bit, but I want to just go back before we get into the details about Alaska.
Yeah.
And okay, where were you born and how did you end up in Alaska?
Well, I was born in Vietnam. Came over to the States when I was 1. So it's been, I have, an experience, an American experience is not really, it's not super common for, just the American experience for me is a little different than most people's. What drew me to Alaska was just, I knew that I didn't want to just do the same old thing. I kind of got bored, and I wanted to try something new, and I knew I was on the right track because people looked at me funny when I said I was going to go to Alaska.
So where were you at the time? You said you came over from Vietnam, you were adopted, I'm assuming. I mean,
yep,
I know.
Yep.
And in Minnesota, Iowa?
I graduated high school from Beulah, North Dakota.
Oh yeah, North Dakota. Okay.
We moved out there when I was in like 5th grade.
So when your parents adopted you, where were they living?
They were living in Reamer, Minnesota.
Okay.
So Minnesota, northern-ish Minnesota, Reamer, Rolog, Foxholm.
So close to the Fargo-Moorhead area. It's pretty close.
Pretty close.
And your dad was a pastor. So is that how you traveled around?
That's why we moved from place to place, and we ended up living in Beulah for the last 7 years of school for me. And my parents moved like a few times subsequent to that.
Okay. So you were in Western North Dakota, central Western North Dakota, and you decided to go to Alaska after high school, or did you go to
after my first year of college?
After your first year of college. So you didn't continue your college in the order that most people do?
I just went for the summer.
Oh, for the summer.
Oh,
okay.
yeah, the salmon season up there starts around the 4th of July. I actually had to come back early before the salmon season was over to get back for class.
Okay. And where was that? Where did you go to school?
Up at UND.
University of North Dakota. Okay. So we're getting the picture all here, everybody. So Josh was born in Vietnam. You are of mixed heritage. Josh, I have asked you before, and you've been very gracious to tell me what your ethnicity is. And if you can't see this on video, Josh has a very unique look. You do. You have, for one thing, your hair's down to the middle of your back, which is always very unique about you. What is your heritage?
So it's half African American and half Vietnamese. So
And
all
does
of that combination gets you this.
I know, right? And are you okay with talking about that? Because I've asked you
Oh yeah,
before, and you and I are friends. And so I always wonder about this whole like politically correct conversation to have with people to ask about their upbringing and their heritage. And I know you well enough to know that you're not going to be offended by me asking that. But I think that's a really weird place that we find ourselves in right now.
absolutely. I think it's that's one of the things that we just as people haven't gotten really good at communicating about. And we've somehow attached stigma to non-traditional sort of paths,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
But we all and even people that have similar pathways that I do, adopted kids, whatever category you want to put us in, we all have different paths too.
Yeah.
So if you hear about somebody that came over from Korea or Vietnam or China or
Mhm.
any of those Eastern countries, it's easy to group them all together and say, oh, that's the same.
Yeah.
You and my friend Mark and
Mhm.
my friend Karis, and we all have the same story, but we don't.
Mm-mm. Not at all. And even with your siblings, you have different stories.
Yep, absolutely. And out of the five of us, four of us are adopted.
Yeah.
So we grew up in a I guess you'd call it a non-traditional home.
Very. And this is a whole other conversation that I'd love to have at some point, because this is fascinating to me as a normal. You've said that you're not normal. Well, I'm white. I mean, there's not anything really unique about me in this part of the country and where I am from. A lot of us are pretty homogenous. And so that to me, because I'm so curious, isn't okay to just believe that it's normal. I mean, when you said that, that's not what I'm not to me. And so that's just a whole other conversation. So I wanted to get that out of the way first. And then I want to talk about, you went to Alaska, you didn't want to do things traditionally, although you were raised in a pretty traditional pastor's kid way.
Yeah, it's kind of like a weird dichotomy of the makeup of the family, but it was upper Midwest, pretty typical upper Midwest upbringing
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. And so you kind of bucked it a little bit. It sounds like yeah.
Yeah, I kind of did. And like what's I think really valuable to me from my upbringing is so many of the lessons that either were easy or were hard, that I learned along the way about you know how how I participate in the world with other people, how I see other people, how I'm perceiving everything in the world. Um, I'm very grateful for a lot of the lessons that I learned, even though I didn't take a real typical path out of that upbringing, which I don't know what you can really call typical anymore.
I know, true.
With the way people are doing their work or pursuing their passion.
Mhm.
It's I don't think I mean, I work from home. I don't think that used to be pretty unique,
Yeah,
but it's not anymore.
yeah.
um I do a lot of remote work. That's no longer a weird thing.
Mhm.
So
And I
uh,
think that's such a good segue, because although you were maybe a trendsetter, maybe you were somebody who wasn't afraid to do something that other people hadn't done. It sounds like now it's kind of old hat for you. I think about Zoom. I've been using Zoom for years before the pandemic. And it
yep.
was almost like I was this savior when the pandemic happened, because people were like, what? There's something you can use? You're like that too, I think.
Yeah, I had a lot of chances to work with people remotely long before the pandemic hit, and so I got a lot of the all of the hurdles that first time and early users always have with cameras and mics and and figuring that stuff out. I will say I'm still sort of evolving that with adding a little bit better equipment, a little bit better lighting, things like that, so that I can show up the best I can in these situations, because I happen to have to do that quite frequently.
Yeah. So I interrupted your story about getting, another thing that I heard in your relaying of your pathway, that how you got here is, it seems to me, and again, this is a judgment maybe, or this isn't true, but this is the way I hear it. IT people, people who like computers are nerdy and don't like people, like engineers, right? Completely not true. But you're sort of throwing that out, because you're telling me that while you can do all the computer stuff, all the technical things, all the financial things, it sounds like you prefer working with people.
Absolutely. That's one of the sort of the themes of my sort of path, more recent path. And I spent a lot of time digging into the technical stuff. I spent a lot of time digging into the numbers stuff. But one of the things that is kind of an overall theme I'm always thinking about is I'm inspired by a quote by Desmond Tutu, and he said, at some point we have to stop just pulling people out of the water. We have to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And one of the things I realized about my work was that even though it was really easy and fun to do, the financial stuff is as far downstream as you can get when you're helping a business.
Mm-hmm.
All the decisions have already been made. All the work's been done, and the financials are just basically a postmortem of what happened. Mm-hmm. And so a person, and I will say it's really important for people to know how to do that, but I've found myself drawn to moving upstream. So along the way, I got into a coaching program where I was learning. It was a 48 module coaching program. And I realized, oh, the financial part of this picture is not even close to the fundamentals of business. And so I got a lot more in tune with things like purpose and values, management styles, how to attract the right kinds of people, all that stuff. And then, have a financial structure that works, that's sustainable and peaceful, and turns your company into something valuable.
So when you think about back on that, you said there was a point at which you got into this 48 module coaching program. You were on a path to be pretty, traditional, financial, doing the things you were doing, software. What was it that had you stop and go, wait, upstream is more interesting to me than downstream?
Well, the more I studied it, the more it's one of those things that, on the one hand, the financial stuff, the technical stuff, for me, that's it's kind of fun being on the edge of technology, but it's not as compelling of a story as how what's really important to people. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that the question of like what's important to your company is a question that too few people really seriously ask themselves on a regular basis. And that to me was just the more and more I was exposed to it, the more I was learning about my business, and I was working on implementing these modules with a group of people in an accountability group. I realized that I'm more energized when I spend my time on working on the meatier, more fundamental stuff.
Interesting. So you recognized, this is going to sound funny too, I suppose. Traditional business, at least the way I was exposed to it, had very little to do with feelings and much more to do with your head, like think it through and do it. Don't worry about how it feels. Yep. And what I'm hearing you say is that shift is a big one and very necessary to having a fulfilling business.
I think, it's there's a lot of remnants of the sort of the manufacturing era that tried to carry over into the knowledge worker age. And it's such different worlds. I was one of the books that was really helpful for me was the book called Human Sigma. It's basically the comparison to Six Sigma, where in the manufacturing world, you eliminate the variation in the process to get consistent results. But in the knowledge worker age, you have to, instead of trying to control the variation of the process, you have to manage the variation in the outcomes. So in the knowledge worker age, you're dealing with people. And the second you try to treat people like machines, you're going to burn them out. People don't work like that. And a lot of the things that made companies successful in the manufacturing age isn't what's going to get knowledge worker businesses to that level, not even close. And so there's a lot of in this kind of transition, 90s, 2000s now, where we're kind of a shift from one to the other. We're kind of opening our eyes to like the difference between working with people and working with machines. Because like you said, when it's machines, you just turn the dials, and if it's not working, you turn the dials, and then the machines do something a little bit different. You don't have to think. You don't have to worry about how you feel about it. You just do it. With people, works a little different.
And so thinking through that shift of, you said 90s, 2000s now, that's a long period of time. And sometimes it feels like the shift has been really slow, because we still have people who are leading organizations with that old mindset that people are like machines.
Yes. And it's kind of a copycat scenario where people feel like if enough people are doing it, I should be doing it too. In fact, that still exists today, where you do any kind of search on any platform that you ask, how do I make this thing into a business? Essentially what the answer is most of the time is going to be is go find out what other people are looking for, go find out what other people are doing to solve that problem, and then copy those people. And that's certainly one way to make money, but it's not, it doesn't speak to me.
So interesting, because you were in financial. I mean, you were all about the money. You were all about helping people make the money. And it feels like, well, I know that about you because we've had these conversations, but the distinction then is having a ton of money without having heart and soul is very shallow.
It is. In fact, this is the part of the story where I had to rebrand, because I really thought that the heart of my business was about the money. If you can help people make more money, they're going to be in a better position. So one of the things that I decided to do was interview all of my clients. I just asked them, what are you getting out of this? And I was expecting, because we really, our selling point was, businesses are wasting about 8.5% of their revenue every year. They throw it away because of things that they're missing in their business. And we can, our selling point was we can get half that back. On average, we get half that back in a year. And so, of course, my thought was, well, people are going to be pretty excited about how much better their bottom line is, or how much better their cash flow is, or how much more valuable their company is. But every single client of mine said, well, that's all nice, but what's actually the most important thing is that I'm so much more confident in my decision making now. And the peace of mind that comes with confident decision making, and not eliminating guesswork, is way more valuable to a person than even a healthier bottom line. And so that's the star I followed, because I felt like if I can help people make more confident decisions, there's a lot of different ways that I can do that. Right now, this is one of those ways. And if I can keep to that theme, then this is part of that coaching program where I had to clarify what does that mean for my company. And so I go back to, so the origin story of my company's name is, I think back to time I spent in the garage with my dad, right? And my job, which is probably pretty common,
Yeah.
is to hold the flashlight.
Yep.
I didn't really know what I was doing, but the more I paid attention, the more useful I became,
Mhm.
right? To the point where he would actually ask for my help
Mhm.
in doing that.
Mhm.
And I think of the same thing today. I don't have to pretend to be an expert in anybody's business, but I do have a pretty cool set of tools that I can use to shine the light on the areas of the business that need attention. And so that's where Torchlight came from. AE stands for Audentis Electionis, which translates from Latin to fearless decisions.
Oh man, that's so good.
So
Yeah, this is all on your website, and I love this because I did read through this. And it's funny when you are friends with somebody and you talk about things that are important in a social setting, you don't always get to that whole, that piece, that soul piece. And I love that you said the origin story of your business was this. And I knew that about Torchlight and how it was named. And I love that you said you interviewed your clients and the clients gave you answers that you weren't expecting.
yes.
What do you think that is? Because is that something to do with who you attracted to work with you in the first place?
I'm not sure about that, but I know that it was really important for me to be open to whatever answers they gave me.
Mhm.
Because, and that was another piece of my awakening, in that what I thought people wanted was sort of on the right track, but it wasn't nearly as compelling of a story as what they actually needed. And my conclusion that I bring, that I thought of was, well, if that's the most noticeable thing that they got out of what I do, that must be the thing they needed the most.
Mm.
And now that I look at like how the confidence level that people have in their decision, it's so rare to see somebody that's super confident in their decision making. It's so rare. And
You know,
so,
sorry, go ahead.
well, there's lots of there's lots of individual examples of people who have done the opposite of that trend. I know we've talked about Rick Rubin.
Mhm.
And
I
the
was
way
just going to
he
say
thinks
Rick
about
Rubin.
that. Yep. And he's another inspiring story, even though I have nothing to do with the music business, but the fundamentals of what he talks about in his business is so true, so true. People are, and this also brings me to sort of one of the other topics that you wanted to talk about. People are in general in sort of an autopilot that life has taught them to be in.
Yeah.
Right.
Before you go down that, I want to back up with Rick Rubin because this was so freaky to me last week. So if you've been listening to this podcast at all, or if you've been following me in the last couple of weeks, I discovered Rick Rubin about a month ago. So this was brand new to me. Didn't know who he was and never heard of him. And I now call him my spirit animal. He's actually helped my art. He's helped everything because his story is so compelling to me. So I haven't told that many people about this aha I've had. And you and I were having a beer last week and we were just chatting about something in general. And it wasn't even about this. And you mentioned Rick Rubin and I went, what? How are you? You just out of the blue, right? Out of the blue mentioned Rick Rubin. And I know, Josh, that's why I love having beers or coffee with you, because there's something that connects us on a more than surface level. And every time we get together, something magical seems to sort of come out of the conversation. And I'm guessing you have that experience with clients and they have it with you more than you probably say often, because that's what shining the light kind of does.
It's the kind of thing where I've had to have, it's kind of a leap of faith for me to just trust who I am. Well, first of all, find out who I am.
Mm.
And then it's the contrast of chasing versus attracting, right? And the more I chased, the more distracted I was. And I was focused on the chase and not like what the destination was. And when I started realizing, spend a little bit less time chasing and a little bit more time attracting, it's the same. This was also inspired by another author, Simon Sinek, who said, spend a little bit less time trying to attract people who need what you do, and a little bit more time trying to attract people who believe what you believe.
Yeah, so true. Yes.
Right. And that on its surface seems like that's a tough ask, because like I said before, there you can search on the internet for results. Here's what people are looking for. Here's what people need. But in the same vein, like when I started thinking that way, when I started approaching my business that way, when I started approaching people that way, the way people introduced me changed. And it changed from, you need this, Josh does this, you should meet. It changed from that to, you got to meet this guy. Talk to him for an hour. I think you'll probably hit it off.
Yeah. And
it's at that kind of deeper level that I end up having so many conversations with people. And that's why I love what I do, because I get to have conversations with people that one of the most common things I hear when I talk to people is, never heard it like that. I never get to talk to people about that. Those kind of themed questions. And I'm like, oh, I get to talk to people about it all the time.
Right. So then that leads me to our conversation about networking and business building and traditional ways. Like you said, you can look on the internet and you can find out how people are doing things, just copy what they're doing.
Yep.
And if we don't know better, of course, that's what we do. You stand on the shoulders of giants. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. All those kinds of things we've been taught for so long. And you and I both are pretty good networkers as it relates to building a business or, doing what you're supposed to do to pass referrals and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And I sense that both you and I felt a little bit hollow in that process when it was all about what you're supposed to do to follow the rules instead of to follow your heart.
Yeah, there's when you start committing your life to that more fundamental thing, it's a thing where you tolerate the status quo, and it eventually can burn people out, and that happens, and that's totally normal. And I don't regret a second of any of these pieces of my experience. But I also recognize that the way that the way we're trying to do it isn't fully aligned with what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's soul connected. I keep using the word soul because I can't really think of another way to say it right now. But that piece of us, that beingness of us, what you do is irrelevant to me in this conversation. I think to you too. It doesn't matter what your clients do for a living. It doesn't matter what your clients are, what business they're in. It matters who they are at that level of awareness somewhere.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that the pandemic really helped teach me. I got to talk with a lot of coaches. There's a zillion of us, right? And that was one of the things that I noticed just in the pattern. I like noticing patterns. What I noticed is that all of them, and I think this is really important, all of them were working with their clients, answering the questions, where are you and where do you want to go? Super important. And literally probably 35 of the 48 modules in my coaching program are about answering that question. But they seemed, what was more noticeable was that they seemed to just gloss over the question, who are you? And the misconception that I've seen a lot of is that people think they know the answer to that question. But if you really ask a person that question and expect a really honest answer, so many people have never they've never actually gone through that exercise of writing it down or defining what does that word mean to you. I mean, you get a lot of times when you ask that question, the answer you get is the answer that the respondent thinks you want to hear,
Yeah.
or what their partner would want to hear, or what their parents would want to hear. And that's a starting point, but that's not who you are. That's who you might aspire to be, but it's not really who you are. And
That's
so, like,
scary though. That's scary.
it
That's a
is.
scary conversation.
It is, because, and part of it is because our psychology has already figured out a way to keep you alive. And it doesn't have anything to do with taking these deep, asking these deep questions. So for somebody to have to, it's the illustration I always use is, think of being on a long drive. You could drive from Fargo to Bismarck and not remember going through Valley City or Jamestown. You hit the steel exit and you're like, I made it, but I don't remember any of it. Right. And that's kind of an analogous to the way most people live their lives, is that they're making their way through it. They're going through the actions that, keep you fed, keep you housed, keep you clothed, things like that. But they're not really paying attention to what's going on right now. In a lot of cases, and this is where some of the different philosophies come into play, where we're so worried about our past and our future, and we don't spend hardly any of our time in the present. And that's one of my newest objectives with my business, is to help people inch the percentage of time they spend forward in the time they spend being present.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to talk about the Enneagram, which is a tool that you've gotten really good at, I would say, good at understanding. And is it due to that quest to find out who you really are?
Yeah. It was kind of a parallel study topic that I had when I started the coaching program. And there's a lot of really good information about personality, and there's a lot of great tools out there. One of the things that drew me to the Enneagram is how, in addition to understanding the sort of the nuance of the behavior patterns of certain personality types, the Enneagram adds that what's they call a vertical dimension. So you can learn about not only what type you are, but how healthy you are in that type. And what does that look like? And the other part that I'm really that I love about the Enneagram is that even though there's a ton of information available about the Enneagram and all the other personality tests, or all those personality typing tools, a lot of them dwell on the typing part of it, and they don't spend a lot of time on helping people understand how they got there. And that's not as clickable.
Yeah, right.
It's not as fun or funny. And in fact, when you start going down that path, things can get kind of scary, because you start uncovering stuff that is related to things like trauma.
Yeah.
And stuff that created the ego response that helps protect us.
So is this, in your awareness of this, does this have anything to do with the mental health issues and crises that we find ourselves in?
100%. And the fact that it's so hard, it's difficult to have this conversation. This is why you're thought of as an exception if you're getting therapy. Where with what I've learned, my wish would be that we would not only normalize the mental health stuff but we would be as excited about, the first person in a family to go to therapy as we are about the first person in a family to go to college.
Ooh, I like that.
Because we're talking about it's generational stuff that's happening. And one of the things that we learn when we study this kind of thing is, and this is part of my personal journey, is that the people that were an influence on me growing up were doing the best they could with the information they had at the time and the level of health they were in at the time. And they were raised by, guess what? People who were doing the best they could with the information they had. And I think it was Maya Angelou that had her quote about do your best, and do you know what you know is best, and when you know better, do better.
Yeah.
And this is our opportunity to know better and do better. And there's what we call the momentum of doing it the way you've always done it. We have to overcome to help people turn off that autopilot and be present where they are.
Well, and I think if people are present and they have any amount of time, I mean, just take 5 minutes and get really present, it's pretty evident that things probably aren't working the way they would desire if they stopped.
Yes.
And I think just noticing, that's why I love your analogy of the light, shining the light on things and being able to be completely honest in a safe space with somebody to say, this is what I thought it was. You said it about your journey. I've said it about my journey. I thought I was doing the right thing. Well, and not that we did anything wrong, Josh, but the thing that was what I was supposed to do. I was following the right people. I was doing everything the way I was told and taught. Yep. And there was something that I call in my life a God-shaped hole. We call it God, universe, whatever. There's something deeper that's just missing. And I didn't recognize it till I slowed down. And I think that, to your point earlier about the pandemic, nobody had any other option during the pandemic. We had to slow down.
Yep. Yeah, that's the it's a really hard thing to realize that that I think of it this way. I don't think that, like you said, it's not wrong. It was just incomplete. We were making our decision based on incomplete data.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I give myself grace, knowing that I didn't start my business doing exactly what I should be doing 10 years later. And I don't expect anybody that starts a business, unless you have a very prescriptive kind of business that is like regulated or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy that I have evolved. In fact, some of the most compelling and interesting stories to me are the stories about how people change their minds. Those are the most compelling stories to me, because there at some point in that story, they had to stop and think, wait, this momentum I have of thinking the way I've always thought might not be right. It might not be the right path. It might not be the right direction. It might be the realization that in this ladder that I've been trying to climb for the last 20 years, that ladder is leaning up against the wrong wall. And that's a hard realization to make. But one of the things about being present that I've noticed just in talking to people about just general life is that if you ask a person a story about the best moments of their life, the best days of their life, I almost guarantee it, there's going to be an element of that they'll explain, and without knowing, they'll explain that they were present. We weren't worrying about this, we weren't worrying about that. We were just there in the moment, just living it up and just having this great time.
Yeah.
And if more people could discover that being present is an element of the best moments in life, we'd want more of it.
Well, well, and to relate that to business, because again, undoing generations of this is the way it is. You work hard, you work your fingers to the bone, you know, put your nose to the grindstone, all of those things we've been taught. There's nothing wrong with working hard, but working hard at things you love that enrich your soul it's hard work. I mean, what we're talking about, uncovering the soul of us and peeling back the layers of the onion and all of those things, that's hard work.
Absolutely.
And that's probably harder work, at least in my experience, than, you know, digging a ditch, hard physical labor.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And that's one of the, like, it's a social barrier. And it's just like a lot of things, it's a human construct that we've just really, really embedded into, the way my friend Rick puts it, we baked it into our molecules. And that's really hard to change. And any change, even though the outcome is going to be better and make you a better person, it still is hard and still can hurt. Uncovering some of these motivations, it's hard. And this is where normalizing expression of emotions needs to be a thing, where it's not, I don't have to think whether or not I'm going to worry about people seeing me cry, for example. Is that's a totally made up social construct that, I mean, it for some reason that's not okay to show, but showing other emotions is okay.
Anger is justified, but, you know, sadness or empathy is not. And it's just so funny. It's this hard and soft way, you know, hard emotions, good, that person's tough. Soft emotions, you know, seem to be, I don't know, touchy-feely, as one of my bosses told me. Touchy-feely crap. But so Josh, we could talk forever, and we will, you and I will, but for this podcast, I love on your website, it says decisions in the dark are difficult. Decisions in the light are substantially easier. And what Josh does, he says, we shine our light so the world can see yours.
Yeah. I was the study of the Enneagram really helped focus my just the way I think about people. I think of them as, and this is, I mean, you can read it in the Wisdom of the Enneagram by Ryzen Hudson. And in it, a scenario is described where he came to the realization that people are beings of light, and everything in their world, everything in along their journey has the potential to cover that light up. The light's still there. It shines as bright as it ever will. So I had, when I was working on that sort of catchphrase, it's not about me lighting your light. It's not about me, you know, it's not about, it's more about you discovering your own light.
Yeah.
And the thing about psychology is that we're getting more and more smart about what we know about how psychology works. And the more we know about what's covering up that light, the more transparent those things become. And it becomes easier to see each other's lights. And of course, it's really important to see other people's lights, but it's ultimate importance to see your own light. And the way that I summarize that is, the best gift you can give yourself is a good look at your own light. And the best gift you can give somebody else is the knowledge that you can see theirs. Because so many people go through their lives not knowing how to recognize their light or other people's. And that's totally transformed the way I just see people in general. And it's a challenging thing. And there are a lot of people who will very vehemently disagree with me in the thought that your actions are not who you are. Your attitudes aren't who you are. In fact, the motivation for those actions aren't who you are. They're present with you in this journey, but to define a person, you have to really go deep.
You have to go upstream.
It's I mean, I have a whole webinar session that explains a lot more in depth on why that's even important to even think about. Because this is we're in a situation where there are companies that are making trillions of dollars exploiting this knowledge, and we're all their product, and in a lot of ways unwittingly. And the more people know about how this works, the closer we're going to be to all those companies having to figure out a different way to make money.
Wow, that leaves us with some intrigue for the next conversation.
Yes.
So Josh, there are so many things that you can do for people, individuals, businesses. How would people get a hold of you if they want more information?
Hello at Torchlight AE is my generic inbound email box. That's the email that's at the bottom of my website. I'm on all the socials, Torchlight AE. You can get a hold of me on all of those. And don't be afraid to ask. Fargo Moorhead is a small town. So if a person's in the metro, they probably know somebody I know. Certainly if they know you.
Oh, well, that's the beauty of living in a small town. That is really one of the greatest things about being here. So if you've heard this and you live in the Fargo Moorhead area, I would say the same thing for me, Josh. You and I, Thursdays at 4, we'll probably be starting. We are starting up our weekly conversations at Front Street Tap Room in Fargo. And either one of us and other people that are attracted to this kind of conversation will probably be hanging out at places like that. So, Josh, this is so great. So many things to uncover, so many awarenesses and ahas that you've shared here. I really appreciate your wisdom, and I more than that appreciate your friendship. So thank you.
Same here. It's so good to be able to just chat with you on this format. And I mean, it's just an extension of the rest of our conversations. They're always really fascinating.
For sure. So as always, everybody, you can understand a little bit more today why it's so important for all of us to get real, radical, energized, authentic, and learning focused. And when you get with your people, you circle up and you have the freedom and the safety to actually get real. And that's what we do on the podcast. And that's what we can do in person. You could do it with Josh. You could do it with Jody. Just be brave enough to reach out. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. I'm not ending the meeting. I'm just ending the recording. Somehow. Oh, here we go. And recording.